One of the main consequences of Trump's actions will be the collapse of globalization. I don't know for how long, I don't know how we managed to break them up, but at least Trump has taken steps to prevent globalization from happening. I don't know if he's doing it intuitively or if he has a clear idea, but it's almost impossible to imagine greater damage to the idea of globalization than what Trump is doing. His idea of dividing the world into spheres of influence completely upends and reshapes the world. It's not about having just one policeman in charge, but 5, 10, or 15 with influence in the world. It's about these zones starting to interact with each other as well. Some may interact positively, some negatively perhaps. But first of all, this completely eliminates the possibility of small wars within the zones. And secondly, it most likely leads to the fact that it will be much harder to destroy humanity. I think it will be much harder. But let's go in order now, because you might be wondering, what are you talking about? Well, you'll understand soon. Just listen a little further. Let's finish today and you'll get it. So, 2026. 2 months have passed. The world has already, in these 2 months at the beginning of the year, entered a state of constant turbulence. We're constantly being shaken. Even if you forget for an hour about Iran, oil, the dollar, and store prices, the very architecture and global economies are changing right before our eyes, aren't they? And I want us to go over the following topics today. OPEC's decision to increase production. And what does that mean for gasoline prices? It's a small thing, right? Yes, OPEC Plus. Several countries got together, OPEC Plus, like Russia and some others, and they decided we're increasing production. Second, why are investors afraid not of today's news, but of tomorrow's? And what kind of news is that? And how China is quietly restructuring its oil policy, or I would even say the oil map of the planet. And what is Trump risking when he promises Americans something cheaper? A cheap war. They say, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Yes, but when you take risks, you really are risking. So we'll talk about how the old globalization is falling apart without us noticing, and how new economic blocks are being born. And that's exactly how I structured today's conversation, to go through these topics so that by the end it would be clear what we're talking about. Why, right? Ladies and gentlemen, I have a big request. I know you often don't watch the videos all the way through, and I understand. But please try to watch this one till the end, because otherwise what I'm talking about today just won't make any sense. Yes, if you suddenly decide in the middle that, oh, I got it all, goodbye, or I don't know, something else, you turn it off, leave, and don't come back. If it's important for you to understand what will actually happen to your money and your future, then watch till the end. I suggest doing something that almost no one does. Let's put aside rockets and drones for 25 minutes and look at what's happening in the world around this war. After all, it's a local war, and in the historical sense, it's a small one. That's it. Because while the cameras are showing explosions, much more important things are changing in the shadows. For example, the price of gasoline at your gas station. Believe me, that's a much more important thing than what's happening in Russia right now. The size of your loan, and in general, what kind of economic universe you will be living in 5 years from now. While we're watching Iraq, the other hand is doing who knows what. Today we'll go over as many as 7 key news stories and trends, well, briefly, that are already rewriting the rules of the game, and none of them are directly about the front lines. Although the front is related to this as well, they're all about us, if that matters to you. To understand what's behind the news, not just look at the headlines, subscribe to the channel right now, and most importantly, hit the bell. So, why am I talking about this at the beginning? Because YouTube works very simply today. If you haven't subscribed, haven't hit the bell, or haven't watched till the end, the platform acts like we almost don't exist. And our attempts to explain what's really happening in the world stay within a small circle of interested people. Well, it's not that small. There are 30, 40, 50, 60, even 80,000 people watching, but still it's a small circle. Subscribing and hitting the bell isn't about numbers, but about scale. The more of us there are, the harder it is for any authorities to sell us fairy tales without numbers and context. So let's begin. Oil and the viewer's wallet. Let's begin with a topic that affects everyone, oil. In the past 24 hours, the OPEC Plus countries, they agreed to boost production a bit faster in the coming months than planned. They had already talked about increasing production, but they got together again and said, we'll do it faster, formally to reassure the markets and show, don't worry, we won't let oil prices skyrocket. But let's be honest. When the gas station raises the price of gasoline by 10 to 20%, nobody says anything. It's just a signal to the market. Don't worry. I have a feeling that economists came up with the word signal just so they wouldn't have to say, oh, everything will get more expensive. Oh, everything will get more expensive. Why? What I'm telling you right now is important. Because OPEC Plus has two interests that are constantly in conflict: to make more money from high prices and not to kill demand, so that the world doesn't switch to alternative ways of producing energy and saving energy. As soon as we start saving energy, they experience a terrible drop in sales. And now they're showing, yes, we're ready to budge a little, but not enough for you to relax. It's like a landlord who looks you in the eye and says, I understand times are tough, so instead of raising your rent by 30% like I was planning, I'll only raise it by 15%. So your rent was raised by 15%, and you're supposed to be grateful for that. Investors and the fear of tomorrow. The second important topic. Investors around the world are now more afraid of what might happen tomorrow than of what has already happened. The current oil prices and market fluctuations are just the backdrop, let's say, for a tough but controlled scenario. That is, yes, there is war, yes, there is risk, but without a complete breakdown, without key safety nets being pulled, without major energy catastrophes. And here the main question arises: what if the world doesn't get a neat operation, but a prolonged conflict with constant fears for tankers, pipelines, and neighboring countries? I have a favorite saying from Warren Buffett: only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. Well, the tide is out. The tide is just beginning to go out, ladies and gentlemen. But investors are already wondering, if the war goes away, who will be left without their trunks? Which economies? Which companies? Which banks? That's where you come in. When fear grows in the world of big money, for the average person, it always means the same thing: unpredictable prices, fluctuating exchange rates, and expensive loans. And for us, gentlemen, everything is on credit. Here's China. It plays a huge role in all of this because it's playing such an oil chess game. Here's the third piece of news, rarely mentioned in regular broadcasts, but very important. In recent years, China has used every crisis to quietly fill its strategic oil reserves. Prices were falling because of COVID. Russian oil was being sold at a discount. Markets were nervous because of new sanctions, and Beijing quietly avoided making loud statements. They just bought. Oil goes down, they buy. And now, when there's another explosion in the region, China has something that many Western countries don't have: a buffer of time. They have enough oil to hold out for a long time. Do you remember the old Chinese proverb, the saying that's attributed to Confucius? When the winds of change blow, some build walls, while others build windmills. The American partner has very similar things. I just brought up the Chinese one because we're talking about China. So today, Europe is building walls with sanctions, declarations, sanctions, protests. And China is very carefully building oil storage facilities, in other words, its own economic windmills. Whether there will be a hurricane or stagnation, it doesn't matter to us. We already have it here on site, our own. Logistics, supplies, alternative routes. To put it in simple terms, China is like a neighbor who bought rice, canned meat, and gasoline before everyone started to panic. and then calmly watches as everyone else rushes around the supermarkets. America, which almost always is the one behind all the changes, is like that very hurricane. That's right, but it always has to keep two things in mind: war and the wallet, the United States. On one hand, Washington says, "We are strong, we have our own oil, we can withstand any storm." On the other hand, economists inside the U.S. are already warning, if the military campaign drags on, it will hit the most sensitive spots: the price of gasoline, consumer demand, and loans. In general, American history is obsessed with Iran. And remember how many times the policy of quick victory, how many times in your lifetime in America, a quick victory has led to long, costly, endless wars. Then they drag on for decades, and then for another 100 years they're analyzed in textbooks. What exactly happened again and again and again? There's a good phrase that's attributed to Mark Twain: history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Today's situation really rhymes with previous episodes. When did Washington think it was controlling the speed and depth of the conflict, but in the end, at best, only controlled its own government's approval rating? And even that, not very well. Why does this matter to us even if we don't live in the U.S.? Because how much the American voter is willing to tolerate financially determines how long and tough Washington's foreign policy will be. If Americans at some point say, "Okay, but $6 a gallon for gas is too much. Hey, you in Washington, that's too much," then the mood in the White House will change much faster than any geopolitical upheaval. Today, in fact, 2026 has started as a series of shocks instead of a single crisis. The structure of the world economy in 1926. We are used to the 2008 crisis, the COVID crisis, the crisis of the 1920s and 1930s. It's as if the world gets hit with one big blow each time, followed by a long recovery. But in recent years, it looks different. It's not a single crisis, it's a series of shocks coming one after another without pause. Pandemic, logistics collapse, energy crisis, trade wars, and now there's also a new major war in the Middle East, which could stop the flow of oil through Hormuz and... The good news is that most serious analysts still don't see a direct threat of a repeat of 2008. Well, with a mass collapse of banks, a complete halt of lending. The bad news. There are several bad ones. We live in a state of chronic stress. Neither the economy nor the people have time to recover between blows. You know, hit on the head, on the head, on the head, then, on the butt, then again on the head. All right. But what positive things are coming out of this? You know, sometimes people say, so to speak, like lost a battle but won the war, or the other way around. Like won the battle but lost the war. All of this that I told you about, these are battles. But where is the real war happening? It's the collapse of the old idea, already old back when the 1970s began in France. Then it spread, right? The old globalization and the new blocs, that's where Trump is pulling us. So the strategic levels, all of this used to be tactical. This is something that's barely talked about on TV. They just haven't understood it yet, even though Trump has already said it a couple dozen times. Miller has said it too. Steve Bannon talked about it. Who else, so to speak? Well, maybe I can remember, right? Lutnick talked about it. Still, it hasn't gotten through. There aren't any real economists on television. I'm afraid there aren't many analysts either, right? They're better at presenting material than analyzing it. So the strategic level, which we'll feel within 5-10 years at most, is already happening and breaking the old globalization, where everything was supposed to be for everyone. Oil, gas, technology, money all seemed to be shared, right? And it began to gradually fall apart. Trump 47 started to break it up, and it turned out that it was falling apart. The U.S. is raising tariffs. Boom! They restricted imports to us. Well, I know that the Supreme Council canceled it. Trump has already come up with new moves, so to speak. He'll do something, right? We are separating the economy. We no longer want things to be produced there and brought to us. We want to produce here. We're not even saying, then take it from us somewhere else. No, here. Next, and the EU is introducing its own carbon taxes. You can feel however you want about it, right? But that's another barrier. Boom. Barrier. China and India are building their own payment systems and digital currencies, so they'll connect with each other. Fewer connections between partners, fewer so-called blocks. Countries are starting to divide resources, for themselves and for others. What does Trump say? We have oil. We have a lot of it. We just need to extract it properly, so to speak. We can share and sell it to others. But the main thing is to secure our own market. And we don't want to depend on them or them or them. That's what our planet is becoming like. A big shopping mall where suddenly there are separate entrances and sections for VIPs. For those we don't really like, but we can't kick them out completely. And they hang a sign on us. Come in through the back door, but on the way leave some money for sanctions and duties. I'm joking, of course. For an ordinary person, this means less predictability.
Больше.
More different prices. That is, you buy gasoline here at one price, but if you go to another block, to Europe or the Middle East or China or somewhere else, it's a completely different price. And that's against the backdrop of constant political conflicts. If you've watched up to this point, ladies and gentlemen, you're one of those rare people who care not only about who shot whom, but also about how it will affect your life in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years. This channel exists precisely for people like you. So let me remind you once again, subscribe, like, and hit the bell. It's not just nice for the creator, it's nice for the creator. But it really decides whether another 10 or even 20,000 people see this analysis. The difference is 30 to 50,000, or 50 to 80. I've had 100, 150. It depends on how much YouTube spreads it. If there isn't a certain number, a certain proportion of those bells, YouTube will quietly hide any video under a pile of clips and scandals. The more of us there are, the more collective intelligence we have, which we can use against propaganda, panic, and oversimplified stories. If you want conversations like this not to disappear, just take a simple action. The bell. Everything I described today sounds tough. War, shocks, the collapse of old connections, the struggle for oil and influence. But there is another side. Any such turning point. It's a chance for people who are ready to think, adapt, and learn faster than others. When the world changes, it's not those with the biggest army who win, but those with the most flexible minds. Those who spot new routes, new professions, and new markets in time. We talked about artificial intelligence. It's the same here. I'll tell you, one well-known investor once said, can't remember who right now, the most dangerous place is the comfort zone. The most profitable place is the discomfort zone, where you're still willing to think. That's where we are right now. The world has become uncomfortable, noisy, and full of conflict. But this is exactly the moment when you can figure out how the economy works, learn to read the news more deeply, beyond just the headlines, and use that to your advantage. From personal interest to finances, even choosing places to live and work. In the next episode, I want to take it a step further. We'll go through a few specific scenarios for an ordinary person. What should you do with your savings? How should you think about your profession, about your country, in a world where everything is divided into blocks? Politico-economic blocks, right? And in each of these, Russia is responsible for its own block there. Can you imagine how it will respond if Russia doesn't fall apart, right? China, I don't know, maybe someone else. I hope that Iran, or rather the Iranian people, I hope they'll be able to get rid of those mullahs, ayatollahs, and the like, and that Iran will once again become Israel's best friend. And then the Saudis, the Persians, and the Israelis will take political and economic protection and the advancement of their bloc into their own hands. But it's not about abstract geopolitics, it's about concrete strategies. Where are the risks? Where are the opportunities? What can we start doing today? Even if you don't have $1 million in your brokerage account. So stay with us. It will be very practical. Thank you for watching until the end. Write in the comments what you personally already feel in your life. Prices, loans, work, your sense of the future. So, how is it? Do you have a feeling that something is changing for the better? Because the sense that nothing is changing is a common feeling among people, right? Maybe for the worse? I don't see things getting worse, though. It might be the same, or maybe things are improving. If so, specify what is getting better, because I'm interested. Yes, well, of course, subscribe, hit the bell, and send this video to at least one person who cares not just about surviving another crisis, but about understanding what's really going on. See you very soon, ladies and gentlemen. Take care of yourselves.